My name is Matthew Grant. I'm teaching a course on Cold War Britain and a course on the People's War, which is about the home front in the Second World War in Britain. As a historian, I research the impact of war and conflict on Britain in the 20th century. So mainly the Cold War, how that impacted on British life, British politics, society and culture, but I'm also interested in the Second World War and especially the memory of the Second World War and how that affected how people understood their own lives. My research links into my teaching in so many ways. I'm interested in the Cold War, and it's fantastic to be able to teach aspects of the Cold War that haven't really been explored by historians with the undergraduate students. It means that we can really approach the topic in new and interesting ways, and students can explore the areas for themselves and actually be really forging a path and looking at the sources in their own way and actually really engaging with the topic. Specific new areas of the Cold War that haven't really been explored, really the whole area of how the Cold War impacted on the British home front, for example, the processes of the threat of nuclear war, what it was going to be, what the fears and the anxieties people had living under the cloud of the atomic bomb. That's something historians haven't got to grips with yet. In a similar way, the whole process of being a communist and suffering from discrimination for your political beliefs is something that in the American context is well known, but it happened in Britain too, but it's something we don't know a great deal about at the moment. Well, to explore the memory of wartime, one really looks at memory both of individual people, so memoirs and diaries, but also looking at the broader popular culture, if you will. So we're looking at films, novels, plays. So you're really looking at how motifs from the war and ideas about the war become circulated. What's interesting is that most people have an idea about Britain in the Second World War, whether you live through it or not, and that's derived from multiple ways, from hearing about it through family who might have experienced it directly, from watching television, from reading novels. I've had a dissertation student who's worked on Goodnight Sweetheart, the 90s comedy, and what that tells us about the memory of the Second World War. The war permeates British culture and has done ever since 1945, and it's fascinating for us to explore that. I always encourage my students to explore these ideas for themselves. It's a way that students can really get to grips with history, not just as something they're reading about in a book, but something that they're forging for themselves, and for students to really be producers of knowledge rather than just passive consumers of it. Well, I've published a book on civil defence in the Cold War, and that's about how the government produced the policy to protect the people from nuclear war, and how that policy was a hopeless disaster in many ways, because they were never going to be able to protect the public from the effects of nuclear war. But the policy wasn't designed to do that as such, but rather to create a facade that they were doing it. So it's almost a gigantic publicity exercise to mislead the public into thinking that they would be able to survive a nuclear war, and that's really what the book's about.